Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday morning. I know it can be a lot to get here bright-eyed and bushy-tailed on Saturday after Friday night's festivities, so thank you. My name is Deborah Yashar, and I work with the California Center for Cooperative Development, CCCD. CCCD is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the development and the resilience of co-ops, cooperatives in California. I just want to share a little bit about myself and how I got here. I've been working with small-scale and beginning farmers pretty much my whole adult life. In spite of my rich and varied background that has involved a diversity of, different, I think, impactful endeavors, I'm pretty new to co-ops, and I know many of us are. The narrative in my head for most of my life has been that co-ops don't really work, and co-ops end up failing. Does that sound familiar? Co-ops really have an unfair rap. Because really all types of businesses fail every day, all the time, right? The co-op business model is organized to provide a return to its members based on their needs or their use of the cooperative, not based on the level of their capital investment. Some of the oldest businesses in our country are actually co-ops. But it's our culture here in this country that has made a lot of us skeptical about cooperatives, for many reasons, one being that co-ops were likened to communism, and because cooperatives were unfairly lumped with unions. In fact, my mother and her parents, they were political refugees from Romania, where they lived under a communist dictatorship. Finding freedom here in the United States, the American ideal of the individual pursuit of happiness was revered in my family. In other words, individual, good. Co-ops, bad. But co-ops aren't run by autocratic dictatorships. I'm still trying to convince my mom of that. Ag co-ops started out in this country with small farmers who were struggling. Some farmer cooperatives became and still today are very successful. For example, Blue Diamond Almonds or Sunkissed Growers. In fact, laws were written into the fabric of our Department of Agriculture and land-grant college system to support co-ops. Today, agricultural cooperatives are in every state, serving people in 10,000 locations. Unfortunately, there is a certain degree of generational loss of this knowledge. So our organization, the California Center for Cooperative Development, is a small nonprofit. We're based in Davis, California, and like many nonprofits, we rely on grants that are not guaranteed to support co-op development. CCCD was actually originally one of the many co-op extension offices with permanent farm advisors on staff to help farmers form co-ops. Yeah, there were co-op extension offices throughout California and the country. Why is this? Because it was clear to our government that co-ops were an effective way for small-scale farmers to be productive and successful by achieving countervailing market power. So one of many things that we need to do is to get back to the basics with these programs that were once embedded into our educational and our social infrastructure, so they can once again do what they were designed to do in support of small farmers and with mandated and sustainable funding. So I'm excited to be here with you today to continue to learn and understand the history of farmer cooperatives and how we can really leverage the cooperative business model as a valuable tool to support and address the economic and social needs of California's farmer communities. If you have a cooperative endeavor or idea, you can reach out to me or Aldo de la Mora somewhere in the audience. Are you here? He's not here yet, okay. And we can talk about how we might be able to support you. And now I'd like to present some of our presenters who are here today who really live and breathe co-ops. Each one will present, and after their presentations, we'll definitely have time for a conversation and your questions, and hopefully some answers. So we have Peter Ruddick with Resilient Food Sheds, and then we're going to hear from Brianna Sidney with Mandela Grocery Co-op. And last, we will hear from Will Holloway with Feed Co-op. Tim Page was originally going to speak. Unfortunately, he could not make it, but we are very fortunate to have Will Holloway, who can speak on behalf of Feed Co-op. So let's get started. I'm going to just share a little bit about Peter, and then you can take it away. So Peter Ruddick is a longtime organizer at EcoFarm. You may know him, or have seen him around. He's a supporter of local food businesses, especially via policy and regulation, through his nonprofit, Resilient Food Sheds, and is board president of Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. Peter is co-owner of Capay Valley Farm Shop, a collaborative food hub in Yolo County. And he's been researching the idea of founding a platform cooperative for home-based food businesses. Thank you.
I've got my phone just in case. I'm going to give you some grounding in co-ops, and then we're going to get to the people who are actually practicing co-ops, who are actually running them. But we figured not everybody would know about co-ops, so I'll give you some basics. I'm going to tell you about Capay Valley Farm Shop, which is not a co-op, but which is very co-op-like, which I think is going to help ground. But before I do that, Deborah asked me to tell you more or less why I like co-ops and why I'm here. And I'm going to actually go back to before I knew what a co-op was, that as involved as I am in food these days, it's my second career. I am a recovering software engineer, one never fully recovers, and a refugee from Silicon Valley, where, let's just say, I butted heads with various venture capitalists in their business model. Those who know me know I like to butt heads, so I started young and I started with the venture capitalists. Proud to say I've had a few public arguments with billionaires. Mostly draws, you don't win with them. But the idea in Silicon Valley, you're working for these big investors, and I don't think I understood this in my 20s, is they have the single bottom line, and I know that the single bottom line, triple bottom line are cliches, but I'm going to use them a little bit. And they're always working to make as much money as quickly as possible, and the business model doesn't matter. The company has a purpose, but I actually worked on an application which made ambulances more efficient and saved lives. And the owners, the venture capitalists, didn't really care, because even though we were making money, we were making a little bit of money, and they wanted to make a lot of money. And they had some ideas for other things, to use maps to make other people more efficient. And they were going to make a lot of money, so they switched the business to work on those other things, none of which made any money, but they were gambling, because they hypothesized it was big money. And it took the ambulance app bounced around from company to company till somebody was patient enough to say, I can make a little money and I can save lives. A double bottom line in that case, that they wanted to do both, but they couldn't maximize for making money and continue to save lives. And that started me on a journey which brought me, among other things, into co-ops. I don't think co-ops are the only answer, but I talk about consciously organized, purpose-driven businesses. And I think if you're at EcoFarm, you want to be consciously organized, and consciously organizing your business structure and considering co-ops is an important part of the conscious, the triple bottom line. You all need to make a living, some profit to make a living. We're at the ecological farming conference. You all care about ecology, the environment, so there's two bottom lines. And probably, maybe not everybody, but probably you care about people besides yourself. You have coworkers, co-owners if you're a co-op, employees, customers, community. You want to care about, as the cliche goes, people, planet, and profit. And I think co-ops are a great way to do that. So that's why I'm investigating one for a project coming up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about governance. And when I do this, I like governance. I'm a policy geek. I tend to get groans. Why do I have to care about this? I'm also in the Food Policy Council world, where a number of the Food Policy Councils spent their first year getting to know each other and talking about governance. How we're going to operate, how we're going to vote, how we're going to run the business in the sense of a co-op. In the food policy world, there are arguments of what kind of nonprofit we're going to be if we're going to organize at all. If you're a for-profit business, you want to think about what your model is. When you get started, you're probably by default a sole proprietorship, and that's fine for many things, but when you have other partners, when you start having to worry about taxes, what are you going to do? And many people fall into the first category up there. They fall into an LLC, a fairly simple corporation. Now, the things on that chart under business structures are legally defined business structures. You register with the state as one of those structures. And in doing that, the state has already sort of predefined them and says that you are going to operate according to these structures. And the first line, which has three sort of related structures, S Corp, C Corp, and LLC, are more or less single bottom line companies. They're for profit. The state has defined them for profit, and you have shareholders who are investors who typically get one vote for dollar invested, not always, but typically, and who occasionally will sort of rebel against a CEO who tries to have a double or triple bottom line, because you're supposed to be maximizing our profit. And while we have to make a profit, maximizing it, as we all know, creates all sorts of side effects in society, tends to exploit the environment, our employees, and more. And so there are other kinds of entities that the government will support, and we're going to talk more about government support in the next couple of minutes. But a couple of them are newish. I won't go quite in order. Cooperatives, legally, aren't all that new, although there's been changes in California in particular in the last decade. They became somewhat common legal structure in England in the middle of the 19th century. One of their largest department stores has been a co-op for 160 years. There are various kinds of co-ops. If you know Organic Valley, they are a producer's co-op. They are individual businesses that may be any of these types that market together under an umbrella, which is a cooperative. If you've ever been up to Berkeley to the Cheese Board, they are a worker co-op. The workers own it. If you're a member of REI, that is a consumer co-op. The buyers own it. And then there are various kinds of hybrids. So a cooperative starts off with people, and a number of them have become, I visited Mondragón, which is the world's largest cooperative in Spain, and they started off and for many decades were a double bottom line. They found the environment about 20 years ago, but they were all about people. and they did amazingly wonderful things in dealing with their now over 100,000 employees who are all owners at some stake, but they've only lately come to the triple bottom line in the environment. The benefit corporation is a relatively new thing. Most states have them. California has only had it for about 10 years. It works a little bit like the corporations on the top line, but it allows you to put into your foundation documents things other than maximizing your profit. And the state will defend them where it wouldn't necessarily defend them if you were an LLC. And then the last one I've listed, and there are more, but perpetual trust is a rather new one, and a couple of companies, organically grown up in Oregon and Patagonia, are trying to go in some ways beyond co-ops. If you like to be on the cutting edge, perpetual trust is out there. I'm not convinced yet it's worth going, or maybe I'm just averse to being on the cutting edge. It's got some interesting things to it. But the idea of conscious, where do you want to be? How do you want to protect yourselves? The company I'm going to talk about in the next slide, of which I'm an owner, acts like a cooperative, but it's an S-corp. And it was founded before benefit corporations were available and before the newest round of cooperatives were, and it behaves like a co-op in its bylaws. Now, the bylaws can be defended in law unless they conflict with the foundation. Then you potentially have a problem. If the foundation law, if the S-corp, C-corp, LLC says one thing and your bylaws say another, and you get into a conflict, the judge is probably going to resolve that. So you can write things into the bylaws. It's best to have a lawyer who knows this review them for you so that you don't have any unnecessary conflicts which are going to bite you later. But you can say that we are going to behave consciously, in part by writing some bylaws that says we're a conscious corporation. The last one that I think people overdo a little bit, and one reason I put this up here, benefit corporation and B Corp are different things. They come from the same people, but they're different things. Benefit corporation is a legal foundation for a business, and B Corp is a certification where a nonprofit says you behave according to these things. If you end up in a court of law, that doesn't end up helping you, unless somebody says, okay, you're certified and you didn't honor your certification. Cape Valley Farm Shop is a USDA food hub. I will tell you a little bit about that on the next slide. So when you're creating something, you want to go through, you want to understand this, you probably want to have a lawyer, you want to talk with them, and you're conscious that hopefully you have a triple bottom line, but whatever you want to support, what is the best business structure to support you? Personally, I think the best one at the moment is cooperatives, which is why I'm talking to you this morning. But it may not be for you as long as you're conscious for it. And statistically, as Deborah was saying, cooperatives don't fail all that much more. They do have their problems, they do fail. I know one where their treasurer, a co-owner, embezzled from his friends and co-owners. So they're still human beings together in a business organization. They tend to take a lot of meetings, because if you're going to get all these people talking together and making decisions together, a lot of meetings. And yet, there's a lot of resilience built in and robustness. So, Cape Valley Farm Shop, which a number of you may be familiar with, I am a co-owner of that. We were founded in 2006 in Yolo County. We are a food hub. And that has become a legal definition according to USDA, that if you are majority farmer owned, you get some advantages for direct sales. And so we have 2/3 farmers and 1/3 advocates, which makes us a USDA food hub and gets that direct sale exemption. We were formed in 2006, And, as I said, benefit corporations in California didn't exist then. Our folks looked at cooperatives and decided that we were going to be an S Corp, but we were going to write bylaws which looked a lot like a cooperative. In fact, of the 32 owners, we don't all have the same dollar stake, but we all get one vote. And that is very cooperative-like. There are other things in the way we run the organization that are cooperative-like. There is a risk there that we are an S Corp, and if there were some sort of problem that were to bring us into Corp, would there be a conflict between our collaborative bylaws and the fact that we are an S Corp, which is basically geared toward a single bottom line and maximizing shareholder profit? We have a very good ownership meeting. Our business meetings every April in person are actually very fun events. We meet over lunch, which is, well, since they all supply the cafeteria for this meeting, is the same thing that we've all been eating for the last 3 days. And we're very congenial, but there is that little bit of a risk, the tension between the S Corp Foundation and the collaborative, pseudo-cooperative bylaws on top of it. As sort of a segue into what we're going to hear later, Brianna's going to come next, and then Will go last, but we, Cape Valley Farm Shop, have partnered with Feed Sonoma. In fact, during 2020, the beginning of the pandemic, most of our business is cafeteria CSA, and what happened to cafeterias in March of 2020? We lost over 90% of our business in 3 weeks. But what happened to home CSAs? They grew and they couldn't necessarily get the supplies. Food hubs as an entity, many of which have this conscious, purpose-driven model, tend to be more cooperative among each other. There's potential competition, and sometimes there's real competition among them if we're in the same area. But one of the things that pleased me most in this relationship is that our CEOs, who know each other and work together, switched models very quickly. We lost our cafeterias, they needed the food. Much of it went on a truck from Esparto and Yolo County over to Sonoma County and got redirected into their home CSA program. No food went to waste, everybody stayed employed. That certainly didn't happen in the pandemic. But this kind of purpose-driven, people-centric business had that in its mission, and it was flexible enough to do it. And so as things equalize, as we gradually and slowly come out of the pandemic, we're getting more cafeterias, and as sort of predicted, Feed Cooperative and others have fewer home CSAs because not everybody's sticking with it. And still that cooperation is there and normalizing it. So consciously structuring your companies, you can build a lot of these things in that when you have 1 or 2 investors, they don't care, they maximize. They might have shut us down if there were 2 venture investors at the beginning of 2020 and just shut us down, and that would be the end of it. So Deborah gave my bio. I do have, I've told you in some ways about 3 hats, or she introduced me with 3 hats. I'm sort of trying out a tagline, and maybe you can give me thumbs up or thumbs down on what these hats do. I'm making it easier for small food and farm businesses to do the right thing. I'm trying anyway. So with that, I will pass the mic to Brianna.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to share a little bit about Brianna before she speaks. Brianna Sidney is a co-owner of Mandela Grocery Cooperative. She began working at MGC in 2017 at 19 years old. She had no previous grocery store or formal cooperative experience, but was intrigued by the idea of cooperative economics and the ability to learn how a business is run. Since being at Mandela, Brianna has taken the initiative to learn about bookkeeping, administrative responsibilities, how to buy for departments, and how to connect with the community. She also works at Cooperation Richmond, a cooperative incubator that focuses on supporting Richmond local natives and locals in starting worker cooperatives.
Thanks for the introduction. So I'll start off with giving a history of Mandela Grocery. It started from community conversations that started in the 90s. Folks were just talking about how there were not any grocery stores nearby in West Oakland. There are a whole bunch of liquor stores that have little small things here and there. They'll have onions, potatoes, very shrivelly green bell peppers, but not really groceries. And so people just kept saying, what can we do? What can we do? And it took about 10 plus years of trying to talk to the right people, trying to get the funding, trying to get folks to want to be owners here, to open in, I want to say, 2009. So in 2009, there was about 8 co-owners. It was a revolving door of folks coming in and out. They realized that it was a high learning curve, learning how to run a grocery store. People will come in and say, hey, this particular brand of cereal is so great, I would love if y'all carried it, I would come and buy it every week. So we buy a box, we got a whole case of 12, and all 12 sit there for about the 6 months until it goes bad. And so money slowly starts to leave here, there, people start staying late because the store has to look good for the next day and the store isn't making money. It takes a while for the good amount of people to come in, for folks who are really invested in the community and have the ability to come in until the store starts to turn around. We have to learn how to FIFO, first in, first out. We have to learn how can we have affordable food, but how can we also have organic food at the same time? Those are kind of oxymorons, like organic is synonymous with being expensive. So the way to make that happen is that we gotta have really strong connections with our vendors, have these conversations with them and tell them the situation that we're in and hoping that they'll support us. So a lot of folks say, or a lot of labels, you say, we give 1% of that to charity, or we support this community. When you buy, it's such and such. And so when we talk to these vendors, we say, hey, we noticed you say you support communities, y'all wanna be green, or all these other things. Well, to help us and help us with our community and making sure that we can be green or whatnot of the things that you support, we need the same pricing that you give Safeway. We need the same pricing that you give Berkeley Bowl, because the people in West Oakland who are in this food desert deserve the same quality food that folks in Rockridge do, the same quality food that folks in Berkeley do. And you'll get a lot of, well, I gotta talk to my boss and I don't know about that. But you gotta be willing to have those hard conversations so that they can give you that deal. Eventually, you will get an EDLP, an everyday low price that we have to negotiate every year. But that's part of the hard work that it takes to have affordable food in the grocery store so that the people in the community can have it. In the history of Mandela, there has definitely been a hurdle with having the community members coming in and patronizing. The folks who normally shop at Berkeley Bowl, who normally shop at Farmer Joe's or farmers markets and things like that, they understand the value of the things that we have, and they do see the good pricing. But folks who are used to shopping at, say, Food for Less, or more of the discount places, they're like, this is still expensive. And I don't care how good you can tell me Lasniaudekel is good for me, I don't have enough money for it. So what do? Right? Like, they can understand that this is a Black-owned store and we want to support the community, but we don't have the funds to do so. So we have to work hard to understand, well, how can we bridge that gap? So we have the 50% off program with EBT for California grown produce to support with the community and coming in and being able to afford the produce that's in. We give a neighborhood discount to the folks in public housing, so they get 15% off just for being our neighbors. We often throw community events, and we also just give people free things. People come in and like, you got Doritos? And we don't have Doritos. But I'm not just gonna say, no, go to the store down the street. I'm gonna say, well, we got bean fields, And don't make that weird face. Can I just give you a bag so you can try them? And who's going to say no to something free? And so they take it, they try it. Some people like it, some people don't. But often people will come back and they will keep buying the bean fields. So that's the part of the community connection, trying to bridge that gap, trying to make sure things are affordable. But it's always a constant struggle that we're going through to make sure that happens. Because of course, during COVID, the price of everything went up. And us being the small store that we are, our pricing tiers did not move. So just trying to explain how it is a continuous job to make sure that our stuff is affordable and that the community can have access. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of Mandela. Everyone here is an owner. We are a worker cooperative. Everyone has the same vote. And so if we have no structure when it comes to our meetings, it can be hard to make decisions. So the way that we run our store is that each department has a head, and then there are folks who, really everybody in the store, supports the head in making those decisions and all the things that goes into the department. It's usually about two to three people that's ahead. Kind of went down a little bit because of COVID, but we're getting back up there. But we have our department heads that works on being that vendor relationship, having that relationship in there, getting the orders in and whatnot. I feel like that's pretty basic, yeah, for the department-wise. But when it comes to the co-op side, right, because that's the business side, is making sure our departments are run well, we're looking at the pricing, we're making sure our orders are coming in, we're having our relationship with our vendors. But now the co-op side of how do we really make decisions when it comes to spending big amounts of money or hiring new people, or do we want to have an event? That comes through our empowered committees. So we have committees like HR, finance, admin, donations, that have charters that are written out that explain what their powers are, the budget that they need for the year, and it's presented out to the entire team. And this team says yay or nay, we need to adjust something so that we can approve it, but otherwise you have the parameters within the year to make these decisions. So now we're not waiting on the entire team to say yes, or I need to feel comfortable with this. You now have this small body of folks who are committed to this one committee who are making these decisions, and then they just come and bring it back to the entire team. Now, on the flip side, there are a few things that do need a unanimous vote so that we can make sure that the co-op isn't moving in a direction that we're not okay with as a whole. So there aren't too many things that are like that. One big thing is hiring, as we're going to change our team dynamics, and we have to work with someone every day, and someone who is going to be a potential worker owner, because when you get hired, you're a candidate. There's still some more time that it takes to be an owner, but someone's going to be a potential owner. That's a significant thing. Everyone needs to be comfortable with that, right? We have a tight team over at Mandela, and we want to make sure that we don't compromise our team dynamics. It takes a lot to work together, and one bad apple can really spoil the bunch. So we want to make sure that we are preserving the family that we have built. I feel like I'm jumping around my presentation, and I'm going really fast. So going in a little bit more about decision making. So how do we make sure we keep the worker owners aware of what's happening in the business while making sure things are happening in a timely fashion? Because like I mentioned before, there's the business side, there's the co-op side, but the business side doesn't stop. Even if someone fell and broke their leg, there are people going to be like, where are my groceries? I need to feed myself, which they do. And so we have to figure out how can we make sure things keep happening, but we are still taking care of our team. Let's say someone did fall and break their leg in the store. God forbid, that never happens. But just for this example, we do have health care. If something goes over the premium and someone can't afford that, we will help with that, and we will get them to the hospital. We do have enough people on the team that we need that store to still be open while this person is in the hospital. Right? Like, those are the things that it's easy when you don't have structure to say, well, we just need to close because we need to figure this out, or we just need a breather, or I feel overwhelmed. But that's when you have to slow down and say, well, as a business, there is a fine line here of like, we have a commitment to our community. right? We are part of the community, and we need to make sure we are okay as well. But if we want to make sure folks feel safe continuously coming back to our store, that they can rely upon us, if they only have 1 hour to go grocery shopping and they dedicate part of that hour to come to our store and our store is closed when our hour said we were supposed to be open, we will start to lose customers. So we have to somehow find that balance of how are we taking care of ourselves, we're also sticking to our commitment to our community. And it really is hard, because there are many times it's like, I closed last night and I was here an extra hour and I was supposed to be here at 8 a.m. I don't want to do it. So what do we do? And so folks say, I just need a time and I just need a moment. They send that in the group text. We will figure it out, no questions asked. I mean, hopefully folks, and in the past, folks have not abused it, and hopefully folks do not abuse it in the future, but I think that speaks to how close of a tight-knit team that we have, that if someone says that we need something, we are all going to come together and figure out how we're going to make it happen so you can take your time and the store can keep running. I'll talk a little bit about how we source our produce. Produce is, I believe it's our biggest seller. Grocery and produce are like neck and neck when it comes to our sales at Mandela. And we actually have, a couple years ago, rearranged our entire store to make produce the focal point of our store. It is the first thing you see when you come in. It's right by our cash register. We make the conscious decision to move candies and impulse buys away from the register, so your impulse buys can be apples and fruits and vegetables, which has been working. People will be at the register and be like, oh, I forgot I need broccoli. Oh, I forgot I need garlic. And so it's nice to see people are increasing their basket with healthy things. But we have rearranged our produce to make sure that it is the most prominent thing. We really want folks to come in and take advantage of the 50% off with EBT, or the California grown produce. We go out of our way to make sure we are sourcing from California, so our community can take advantage of the discounts that we have. And most of our produce comes from vegetable, vegetable. Most of our produce comes from vegetable, vegetable, and Earl's Organics because of the consistency and the quality. They deliver every day, so if we need something, we can get it daily. But we do go out of our way to work with small farmers, so we can make sure that we are supporting our community in that way as well. It's difficulties working with some micro farmers and small farmers, but as a cooperative, we go out of our way to make it happen because we know what it takes to become successful. We know that you need someone to continuously support you so that you can keep going. You can't keep growing all these things and then they die, and then what, even if it is expensive, we do go out of our way to do it, and we'll take a lower margin just to make sure that they're able to go on. But we have some specific farmers that we work with. There's Mr. Scott down in Fresno. The Mr. Scott Family Farms. There's Golden Rule Organics. We have the Avalos Family Farms. We do frequent farmers markets, and kind of we'll just go in with a blank check and just start buying some things so that we can fill in some of our holes. But when we are working with these small farmers, we do look for consistency. We need a good amount of whatever it is. Farmers come to us and say, hey, we have X amount of things, can you carry these? And we go out of our way to make it happen, but we gotta make sure there's a good amount of whatever it is. We can't get like 6 squash or only 4 bunches of greens or whatnot because that's all that they have. Because if we are going to work with them, usually they are not organic. And we try to have mostly organic at Mandela, but we go out of our way to have pesticide-free because we know that organic is a business in itself. You have to pay for that certification. You have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops. We understand that pesticide-free does not mean that it is anything less. But legally, we have to put you in a whole separate bin, right? So we got to give you the whole prime time show, make sure that you're the only thing in there. And if we're going to do that, it needs to be bountiful and beautiful, so it draws people's attention to it. Like I mentioned before, we understand that organic is a business in itself, and it is a whole marketing ploy in itself as well. We cannot legally write organic on the produce tag, but we have organic on all of our tags, so it would be weird to not have it there. So we create a whole narrative on pesticide-free, on the farmer that it came from, and really try to inform the community of where this produce is coming from, and it really drives up sales. People really like to hear the story behind what's happening with the stuff that got to their table. I think that's the end of my presentation. I jumped around so much that I don't have a nice end that I planned. But I do appreciate y'all here listening, learning about cooperatives. Mandela has went through a tumultuous time to get to where we are, but really we've been able to stay because of our connection to community. We had a grocery store open not too far from us a couple of years before the pandemic, and it was double our size. They had much lower pricing, and it was a scary time for us. And we went in, took off all our Mandela stuff, little secret mission of like, what y'all got in here, to really try to scope out the competition, because it was worrisome. They were less than 2 miles away. And they closed in the middle of the pandemic. And we really tried to analyze, well, what happened here? Because, they had all the right things, right? They had the space, they had the folks in there working, they had the low prices, and the only thing we can come up with is that connection to community. People really do value that they can come in and talk to folks that look like them, to talk to folks that care, that people can come in, and we've seen kids grow up and we want to talk to them and we give them gifts and we will give them snacks. If kids are coming in and as they do biting apples and things, it's not a big deal. Don't feel like don't feel like, oh my gosh, now let me get my kid. Like, no, we love them here. It's okay, be like that. And so the connection to the community, people really value that they can come in and have it happen. People come in and talk to Brian about hibiscus and wants to know, what does this do? What does Go-To Cola do? And they would rather have that conversation than picking up this supercomputer that we all have in our hands that can give us the answers to the world. But no, they'd rather hear it from an individual who grew up down the street just like they did. I think if you take anything away from Mandela Groceries, the human connection is what really matters.
Thank you, Brianna. And thank you so much, Brianna. Now I'd like to introduce Will Holloway, who co-owns Longer Table Farm in Sonoma County, alongside his wife, Gina. Together with their amazing crew, they grow a diverse mix of certified organic vegetables and cut flowers that are sold throughout the Greater Bay Area. Will founded what is now Longer Table Farm in 2014, and since then, the farm has evolved into a vibrant and thriving business that employs a crew of 12 in the summer and produces around 250,000 pounds of food per year. Will has been working with what was originally called Feed Sonoma since 2017 and served on the transition committee for several years. In that time, Will participated in the co-op design and purchase agreement to form what is now Feed Cooperative. For the last 2 years, he has participated on the board of Feed and is currently serving as board president.
Thank you for that, Deborah. I'm here in lieu of Tim Page, who is one of the founders of Feed Sonoma, and he was supposed to be speaking but got stuck in San Diego. So here I am, so bear with me if I'm a little bit all over the place. I'm trying to sum up his story and then our story as a co-op, so there's a bit to unpack there. Feed started in 2011, or at least in its current iteration in 2011 in Sebastopol, with Tim being the only employee with a non-refrigerated box truck, a cooler built out of plywood in their backyard, and I think about 15 farms that he started to work with that first year. From that point, he started the business with a cooperative mindset, and if any of you have ever met Tim, he's an eccentric and interesting guy. And he takes a lot of inspiration from time that he spent in Hawaii, working with the native community there, and he kind of started the business with a cooperative in mind, but knowing that he didn't have the trust of the farm community, he didn't have a viable business yet, and so he really worked over the next years to build a business that was viable, that had the farmers' trust and that had buy-in. And so, let's see if I can find where we're at. That first year, Tim sold about $200,000 worth of produce to 25 or 30 different customers. He was running 1 or 2 routes a week by himself. He was running the ordering. He was doing all of that. He is still that obnoxiously dedicated right now. I can text him right now about like being 1 case of squash shy on Sunday night, and he'll text me right back, which is ridiculous. But that determination that he put into feed through that whole process was really instrumental into what is now a co-op. In 2018, Tim started discussions with the farm community about wanting it to be a co-op. And he brought that to the community kind of on his own. And a lot of us thought it was a little bit crazy. And a lot of us thought, do we want another commitment, right? Feed was a pretty viable service for us. They were distributing a lot of food. But do we want to be participating in meetings? And cooperatives have a reputation of instability, and even though that's not all that accurate, which I came to find out later, but he brought that to us in 2018, or maybe 2017 actually, when it started those discussions. And through some convincing, a lot of us kind of bought in. And so from there, Feed at that point was distributing through most of the Bay Area. Sales were, I don't know, somewhere around 20 times what they were initially. Feed was working with 50 to 70 producers, depending on the time of year, about a dozen plus employees in the warehouse, I believe 6 trucks running around. So it was at that point that it was a viable and functional business that was really doing what the community needed. And at that point when we started co-op discussions, what that looked like was not particularly exciting. It's not the most like jazzy thing to talk about at EcoFarm, I don't think, but it was a lot of meetings. It was meeting once a month for, I believe, 3 years, somewhere in that range. And those meetings were 4 or 5 hours. We were creating bylaws, we were going through policies, we were trying to hammer out all the details of doing this kind of radical thing of making a cooperative that's not just producer-owned, it's employee-owned, so it's a multi-stakeholder cooperative. We are, I believe, the first one in California to be a fresh food worker and producer-owned cooperative. And so there's a lot to figure out there. There's bylaws, there's everything with designing the cooperative, and then there was also figuring out the agreement for the community to purchase the business from Tim. And I think that's something that it was a very open discussion, and it was a collaborative one that we were able to make work. And it was a complicated thing to figure out. We partnered we had the help of CCCD, another entity called Project Equity, various lawyers and community members to go through that entire process of writing bylaws and vetting those and assessing the business's viability and how much we could pay for it and yada, yada, yada. But one thing that was extremely unique is that Feed was a cooperative purchase too. It was the community getting together and buying the business from a willing seller who was now a producer, or is now a worker member of the cooperative. The management structure didn't really change. The producer members and the board are not involved in day-to-day operations. We're not micromanaging anything. It is a autonomous and functioning business on its own, and the board and community are offering directive, and then we're only responsible for management reviews and hiring. There haven't been that many growing pains because of the unique type of business it already was and because it was already functional. There's been challenges that have come from things like the pandemic, and we pivoted to doing a produce box that's kind of a community-wide. We shy from CSA because CSA has its own meanings, but it's a box of produce from all your local farms, and that kind of kept Feed going through the pandemic when so many customers closed or stopped ordering. The the benefits that we've found so far is really community buy-in, and that it feels like it is a way to make a very necessary piece of infrastructure for our food system have a bit more permanence. The cooperative is not dependent on one individual, it's dependent on a community that's willing to hold up all the parts and pieces. And so we can, if Tim moves on or if anything changes, we can keep the entity going, and that's still there. And that was really the intention from the get-go, is to create a foundational piece to service the farms around us. So as long as there's farms in the community that need to distribute food, there's a need for feed, and hopefully feed will continue to exist. And a cooperative structure was a way to kind of guarantee that, as best we can, at least. All right. A few things about how the cooperative is structured. As I mentioned, we have producer members and worker members. At this point, I believe there's 25 plus producer members. That'll probably grow by 5 or 10 this coming year. There are, I think, 7 employee members. 1 member, 1 vote, 1 farm is a farm is an entity, gets 1 vote, and they get to vote on board elections, and there's a whole bunch of other things that can be voted on, but that's typically most of the individual engagement with membership is on board elections. Employees or employee producers and farm producer, or employee members and farms have equal voting power, but the ownership of the co-op, I believe, is slightly majority farmer owned, and that is, as Peter was mentioning, just for the benefit of the eyes of the USDA. Some other things about the co-op, as far as that goes too, we do sell goods that come from outside of that are not from producer members. So there's still, I believe, 50 to 70 different vendors, producers that are selling to feed, and feed is distributing their product. So not everyone is a member. And same with employees. They need to have a little bit of tenure before they can become a member. And let's see, another thing that I don't know if has been mentioned yet, but cooperatives, or at least in my understanding, can't function at a profit. And so feeds distribution, there's a box fee they're adding on to sell things on the other side. And in theory, in time, what's going to be happening is us farmers will be getting, and employees will actually be getting money back at the end of the year if feed is profitable. And so far, because the co-op's in its developing stages, we've been withholding most of that to try to get a little bit of a safety net going. But we have actually been able to add to that fund every year since the formation of the co-op. Some of the other challenges can come from within the co-op, in that producer members can create their own competition inside or outside of the co-op, whether they're pushing sales through the cooperative or not. We have farms that feed makes up 10% of their sales or 2% of their sales, and we have farms that feed makes up 100% of their sales. And so that can create an awkward situation, an awkward dynamic, and we don't have formal rules around that, but there has been a pretty successful community accountability around those things to not undercut the co-op and to really collaborate. And other than that, the co-ops function as a farmer-owned entity. Like I said, us farmers are not, we don't have day-to-day management involved with the cooperative for the most part. We are meeting once a month. Sometimes we skip September because I think you guys all know what September can be like for farmers. And but we meet once a month. We have directives. It's a long meeting, but we get through it. And that's the time commitment that we're putting in as board members. The terms are 2 years. And so it's really not a heavy lift for us farmers to participate in that. And we're really lucky in that feed has a very stable management team that can run the business on its own and doesn't take a lot of hand-holding at all. I know from my perspective as a business owner, feed has been absolutely essential to our growth as a business, and it's been a real partnership since we started selling with feed. And it's, as a producer member and an owner now, it seems like the next logical step for stability for our business and for our farm community. And it's an awesome thing to see it happening, and it's like simultaneously exciting, but maybe the most boring thing to like actually nitty-gritty get into. But I would encourage a lot of you to pursue it. It's a fantastic structure to get after, and I think that it has a lot of potential for permanence in an industry where we're seeing farms and distributors and food hubs come and go like crazy. It's really nice to see something with some stability. So that about sums up what I've got there. So thank you.
Thank you, Will. All right, I'm sure some of you have questions for our panelists, so we invite you to come up to the mic, don't be shy, and ask away so we can get into some of the rich nuances of co-ops.
Hi. I work at Rainbow Grocery Cooperative in San Francisco, and I haven't heard anybody talk about this, but I wasn't really prepared to speak, so I'm just going to wing this. We are a completely democratically managed business, management on democratically principles. I've seen many types of businesses in my career, and this is truly the most democratically organization I've ever experienced. And I haven't heard anybody talk about democratic management.
I'll mention a couple of things, and maybe other people have observations. Thank you for saying that. And there are at least two models of that. By law, Therese can double check me, you need to have 3 people as a co-op, and if you have a small co-op, 3 to 10 people, everybody can meet. Mondragon, last I got a number, had 103,000 people. They do not have all-hands meetings. As a co-op gets bigger, it has a board, and they delegate to the board to have certain decisions. And so the board would be democratic, but it looks a little bit more like a company in that they've delegated decisions, and they can have a CEO and delegate day-to-day operational decisions, which I think even at the size of Cape Valley Farm Shop and Feed Cooperative, we have a CEO who makes operational decisions. But if they're making the wrong ones, then the whole body can come together in an all-hands meeting in the size of these businesses and say, we have to change our structure. So yeah, there's a lot of democracy built in there, much more certainly than in the Silicon Valley companies I came from, where an engineer could sort of go beg to the owners that they do something and not be listened to. So thanks for bringing that up.
Hello.
Hold it closer.
Yeah, Mandela, for our decision making, we have our empowered committees so that we can, and they have their decision making within them. They're usually like teams of 3 or whatnot because our teams are so small. And so many of us, there are so few of us that many of us are on multiple committees. So we understand like all the different things that are happening. There kind of really isn't anything going on with someone else not knowing about it. But then all those decisions come back to the general meeting where the entire team gets a chance to hear about it. And if it's within their charter, the decision goes through and we can discuss and change about things if something needs to happen. But if something's bigger, it needs to go outside of that charter, then it needs to have a unanimous vote from our team.
I don't have a whole lot to add on that. I think that the way, there's very different styles, types, and sizes of co-ops, like they were mentioning, and then if you have a small business where it's very heavily involved with their own management as cooperatives, I think that makes a lot of room for a fully democratic system. I think that in the case of Feed, we have employee members that are on the board, we have employee members that are voting, but from a day-to-day management perspective, none of the farm community has the capacity to participate at that level. And so it's really essential that we have a business that is running on its own, and it would almost, in my mind, have to be a cooperative within a cooperative for that to be a functional management system that worked for us. But I also really admire that as a structure for a business. I think it's something to aspire to, but it's not something that we have too much direct experience with so far.
Just wanted to add real quick. At Mandela, we are everything, like our board of directors and all that. It's just all the same few folks that we have. So think about like the board of directors thinking about like how does the business run? Is it going to be profitable? Is things running well? And they also think about like, okay, what does the employees need? Which is like, we're just like switching our hats. We are the same people, right? So just trying to think from like trying to step back, not of like, as an employee, like, I'm tired of working these long hours, so forget this business. It's like, no, let me put on our board of directors hat, and it's like, okay, employees are saying that we are not finishing our work in enough time, and so we need to figure out how are we leaving on time, right? So it's not just, yeah, you just abandon the ship. It's like, okay, how do we change the structure? It's not like how do we just keep complaining to each other, but how are we within our structure going to go through our right avenue so that we can change what's needed. That was the reality. We were closing like an hour late pretty consistently. So then we had shifted up, okay, the closing crew, instead of coming at 1, you come in at 12 so we can keep leaving at the same time, but you have more time to get that work done.
Can I give a little bit of background to Rainbow? This is our 50th year anniversary this year. 50 years, and that's talking about a success. We have like 250 member workers, and the structures are at the top is the membership meeting. That's what any member of the collective. You have to be a member to work there, and then we have a board of directors, which is elected by the membership, and they are workers, and then we have different structures like this. Right, for all kinds of different things. And on the department level, each department, the produce department, makes our own decisions, all 51% vote, right? It's all 51%, the whole thing. And these different departments run their own show, right? And so it's this structure like this with all these different committees down here. It's quite complicated, as you can imagine, with 250 members. Right, and it just shows that with enough structure, you can put together a business that's very successful, 50 years after all, and it can be done, but it's really convoluted the way, and it's based on a pyramid thing like this.
Please.
Thanks very much. I manage a small farm now that I don't own and have been noodling on the idea of starting a cooperative farm where everybody's paid the same wage. And that wage is just a function of how much revenue the farm is bringing in every month. And everybody accrues ownership every month based on how much they work. Have you, those sort of two separate parts, if you have any examples of anything like either of those, I'd be really curious to hear them.
So co-ops tend to be more egalitarian. They aren't all single wages. Cheese Board in Berkeley pays their bakers more. It's a key position for them for bakers, and they want very skilled people. In visiting Mondragon, they actually have a policy, and it's a significant delta that the highest paid person, one of the executives who gave us the tour, can be paid no more than 9 times the lowest person who is making a living wage. So it's not totally flat, but it is egalitarian. The story, I believe, in the 70s, CEOs in for-profit companies were making on average 19 times their employees, and by the early 2000s it was 300 times, and that just floated with the market of the single bottom line companies. So those are the kind of things that you can put in your bylaws when you write them, if you're going to have any specialties, any bonuses for expertise, for retaining that kind of thing. The consciousness when you create the company, that's part of it. Do you have totally flat pay structures, or no?
I think it's a very admirable idea, and I think getting equal buy-in from people would be an interesting thing to pursue. But I also think that the one thing that would be the key to that would just be setting very, very clear expectations and bylaws around participation, around the nature of the work, and around the value of the work. Partnership farms have different kinds of work. Doing payroll is one kind of work, and like fixing a broken pipe at midnight before a heat spell is another kind of work. And to value those equally can be very challenging in an emotional capacity in the moment. So I think that it would take a lot of thought into the bylaws and structure of that cooperative to make it feel equitable among members. But that would, I don't know.
We weren't going to tell anybody.
Then just, shh, it'll be fine.
Yeah, I echo what was said. We've tried the flat pay structure, we've tried the differences, and now we've gone back to a flat pay structure but with a higher wage. But yeah, when we were flat and it was like everyone does everything, everyone tries to be a part of these different things, it was hard emotionally. And of the work being done is so different that it's hard to value them. Oh, not hard, but it's a conversation of like, how do y'all value that work and the hours with it, and what are the expectations of people? Because I think it can get easy for folks to be like, I feel like I'm putting in a lot more than this, and I'm getting the exact same pay as this other person. Like, just want to make sure people don't start getting into those feelings, and then that can breed problems.
Hi, I have a few questions. Should I give them to you one at a time?
One at a time, please.
Okay. So the biggest thing that I would like your comments is, when you have, how do you deal with conflict between the bigger members of the cooperative and the smaller members who has only one vote? I mean, how do you get the people with more resource to come in even though they only have one vote? And how do you deal with people who have less resource, who also has one vote and wants to basically run the whole show? So how do you deal with that? That's my first, and also the conflict between the different people who are in different stage of their own personal business. Like, they're running the distribution part and they're running the farm, which is totally different animal. And so definitely a lot of conflict in terms of transfer pricing, what kind of prices are you going to be given. So I snuck in two questions there.
I can speak to that a little bit. The way you can put measures in place to try to avoid the person with the most time having the loudest or biggest role in the co-op. And so one of the ways we do that is there's a sales minimum, and it's not very high, but you have to sell a certain amount through feed to be eligible for membership as a producer member. And what that does is it means that this has to be a meaningful amount of money to a business. It has to be something they're taking seriously. I believe the entry point is maybe $15,000 a year through the cooperative to be eligible for membership. That does a lot to make sure that someone who's doing it as a hobby and has all the time in the world and really strong ideas doesn't get to steer the cooperative in a disproportionate manner. And conversely with that, members that are that feed makes up 10% of their annual sales, and most of their sales are going through other companies and stuff, they're still only eligible for one vote as well. So the power structure is really equal in that, and that helps with that, what could be conflict of interest there. And I don't think I'm the only one that thinks that feeds, one of the unique things we have as an offering as a distributor is the scale of farms that are represented. Sonoma County doesn't have big farms. I have like one of the larger ones and we're tiny. That being said, there's a huge spectrum of farms and products represented, and that diversity is really a strength, and it has not resulted in any overt conflicts yet to this point. But we also have very clear expectations, bylaws, and things around that. And as a board member too, we sign a fiduciary contract. So our interest when we have our board hat on is in the interest of the co-op. I can't be overly representing my own interests as a co-op member when I'm on the board. I can vote however I please. That's different. I can vote in my own interest. But as a board member, if I'm voting on something, that's in the interest of the co-op, and I'm legally obligated to do that.
There aren't a difference in like member votes with us. Folks are pretty much equal, but when the kind of like in power imbalances kind of come in, it's like when more senior members and newer members are coming in, just kind of, we say we're equal, but there are like silent power imbalances that happen, and there are silent like conflicts that start to happen. It's like, I noticed you do this thing, and it's not an official, something that's in the bylaws, but I see that it influences the rest of the team. And the way that we try to handle conflicts that we have in place are a series of meetings of trying to notice that they're there, conflict mediation meetings. And we had a conflict recently and we realized that it didn't work. I mean, we've had a pretty what's the word? I guess I'm gonna say nice team for many years that we didn't have much conflict. So when this big conflict happened and we really had to use our process, it was a rude awakening that this is not an okay process, and we have to do something else. So we are in the process right now of reworking our conflicts, because just having these conversations every now and again is not enough. Like, how are we bringing in the entire team so that making sure that everyone is feeling heard, and it's not just a few folks trying to have these conversations. And also, I think, kind of going back to the human piece of noticing these things early and trying to have conversations about them early. Just kind of thinking about the conflict that happened. There were signs early on, and it was kind of giving it the benefit of the doubt, maybe it's not, it'll be okay, well, we'll see how it plays out. No, don't wait to see how it plays out. Kind of jump in and say, well, yeah, go in and see, how are you doing? Really, I noticed you had this look when so-and-so said this. How does that make you, just really trying to dive in so it doesn't have time to fester into a bigger thing.
So if you have another part, nobody's in line, and anybody else who wants to ask a question.
The other question that I had was about governance, and a lot of the potential members who want to join the cooperative that we're working on are wondering about governance and how they're going to be making sure that the people that we're talking to, everyone have a certain level of trust, but they are worried about into the future how the management will change and how the governance will, what the governance will look like to guarantee that the management will take fiduciary duty that they're supposed to and not just look to their self-interest.
So you're talking about human nature and how some people are more outgoing than others, more apt to be leadership. Some people might talk too much sometimes. And so building that into the bylaws to make sure that somebody doesn't get control. And you do have a lot of people who don't like to govern, even when you ask people to step forward. I don't know if any of you have been around long enough. I was one of the chaperones for the Cuban delegation. We had co-ops from Cuba come here in 2016. That co-op, by the way, is out of business, despite 153 owners. When the founder passed away, he was the glue to the co-op, and it sort of fell apart. I got to visit them in Cuba before then, and they're pushing co-ops. The government has been pushing co-ops. And it's a little bit of a problem because most people don't want to be involved in governance. And yet, and I'm looking at our next questioner, I am happy to be on a stakeholder with Full Belly Farm where I provide some, as an advocate shareholder, I provide some things to Cape Valley Farm Shop that the farmers don't have. And Full Belly Farm, who was a founding member of Cape Valley Farm Shop, is huge, but one of their motivations was to give the smaller farms, of which we have, a leg up. So that sort of collegial attitude that Brianna is talking about, that at least at the beginning, we want to work together and we want to help together and we want to build that into our DNA and be proactive, be aware of what you're saying about the conflicts. It's the same thing if you see somebody or some small clique trying to take over, get at it early, because like any association of people, a cooperative could be co-optable.
The only brief thing I would add to that too is that on the case of feed, we're trying to create a piece of infrastructure that outlasts any of our individual careers. And so we are trying to set the foundation as best we can, but we also have to be okay with the fact that that co-op is going to change. The management is going to change. What it looks like, how it functions is going to change because it's a living organism. And if it's living, then we're succeeding as far as the co-op goes. So.
I love how sometimes one question leads directly into the next person's question. So I was really thinking a lot about how do you, this is an open-ended question to all the panels, how do you deal with strategic planning? Businesses are not static. You gave the example of the founder passing away. Businesses need to figure out how to grow and remain viable. Some things are predictable, some things like pandemics are not predictable, and you get curveballs. So will you each talk about how the tension that exists in your entities with managing the process of strategic planning, and maybe even share a little bit about how your businesses envision the next short and long-term development of your business.
So when it comes to strategic planning for Manila, we're actually doing some new strategic planning like over the next couple of months for our short and long-term goals. Like thinking of the next 1 year, thinking of the next 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years. In the past of how we've done our planning, I think it is more so like dreaming. Like we would be like, we want to have a farm. We want to do this. We want to have these many more farmers. We want to have this many. And it kind of like got real dreamy. And then we list them all out. We pull from them like, okay, what of the ones we said, what can we do within the next couple of months? What can we do within the next year? And then breaking down like, okay, what makes this actionable? And then we adopted the MOCA process, like who's the manager, who's the, I want to say operator, I feel like it's like organizer. But anyways, it's the way of just organizing out the process of how we're actually going to go from idea into it being a real thing. Something that I feel like we haven't done much of that I think businesses do that I think we're going to start learning how to do, or getting into the habit of doing, is really looking at ourselves and it's like, okay, this is a percentage that we need to grow. Not just like, we are really good at looking at our products and like, okay, this has to look good. We're looking at the pricing of it to make sure we're having our margin on there, or that we're talking to our vendor and we're getting our discount. But in terms of like looking at the department and like, what is the percentage of growth and what is the growth percentage that we want to see for the next year, is something that we need to get better at. But yeah.
Strategic planning is something that we are dabbling in. Once a year, we have an in-person meeting with all our board members, And we sit down and we spend, I think it was like a 6-hour, 7-hour meeting, something like that, where we really can kind of get into the nitty gritty. We try to clear the agenda of all the typical obligations of just approving various things and administrative things, and try to really think on what's important for the next year, what's important for the goals that we're trying to set. But that also being said, at this point, we're still trying to, because the co-op is young, there's pie in the sky stuff, there's in the immediate, and we don't have a fully fleshed out process for really having that dialed in, because a lot of it has been like, how do we make this work? How do we get through this thing? And what we've been doing a lot is just formalizing processes to make it so that the roles are clearly defined among management, the role of the board is clearly defined, the intention with hiring employees is a clear picture of what we're trying to do, what kind of jobs we're trying to provide, et cetera. So it's not as much like fun dreaming stuff as it is like, how do we make this an SOP? How do we make this business have like foundational pieces that are easy to translate to other people so that the business is strong even if there's personnel change? But I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, part of me wants to give you another Mondragon anecdote, but I'm also timekeeper, and we're getting close to 10 o'clock. So what I'm going to suggest we do is, this woman will ask her question, and then I saw Teresa's hand. She'll get to a comment if you still want to make it, and then we'll wrap up, and then we can clear the stage for the closing keynote.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Amanda Hickson. I direct a farm institute at a nonprofit, Sierra Harvest, and we are in the very beginning exploratory phases of thinking about facilitating the formation of a regional farmer cooperative. And my question's mainly for Will. I'm curious, do the owners, the producer owners, do they pay an annual membership fee? And also, if no profits yet have gone to the members, what would you say are the main benefits of being a member of the co-op rather than just going at it alone?
Sure. So there is no annual member fee or anything like that. There is a buy-in that when you become a member, it's a relatively small amount of money. It's actually very small for employees, and that can be, if they're employee members, that can be deducted from their paycheck if they like in installments to get to the point of making the amount. And it's an inconsequential amount, and it's actually just in a holding account. So if you leave the cooperative, you get that money back. It's just it's a sign of your commitment, essentially. And I could be wrong on this, but I believe by putting money in that situation, it changes the nature of the contract. What was the second portion of the question there?
If there's no profits yet, what are the benefits of being part of the cooperative?
So in our case, there has been profits, but we are not distributing those to membership yet. So we're withholding all of that to try to make we have a preset goal of how much money we're trying to have as a buffer, just like a reserve. Thank you. And so we've made the decision as a board, instead of allocating a really small amount of money and trying to get up to our reserve slowly, to try to get to our reserve quickly, so then we can then start to allocate money out to membership. Also, when you're talking about 36 or 37 members, the payout is representative to how much you sold through the co-op or how many hours you worked as an employee. So if the amount's going to be on average like a $2 check, it's honestly going to cost us more to cut, print, and mail those and do the taxes associated with it than it is just to withhold it. I think there is power in distributing that money when we can, and I think that's going to be a big step for the co-op, but it's very, very uncommon for a cooperative to distribute dividends in the first, 5-10 years. And so we're trying to be really mindful and build a really strong business. And that's what the benefit is for the members, is that this business is strong and it can be here. You don't have to own the vans. You don't have to run your own sales. You can be a farmer. Being a farmer is hard. There's a lot of hats we wear. And if you don't need to pay a sales manager, that saves you a whole bunch of time and money and trouble. And so, or if you don't need to own a van, that saves you all that. There's a lot of benefits that come with it, even if you're not getting money back. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And if I were to have answered that question from Cape Valley Farm Shop, a sort of cooperative-like, I would have said almost exactly the same thing. You had your hand up at one point. Do you still have a comment or question you want to make? Sure. You wanted to use the mic? And tell people who you are.
So my name is Therese Tuttle, and I'm a lawyer for farmer co-ops, and I'm really fortunate that since 2000, when I formed my firm, I pretty much have only worked on farmer co-ops, and now, well, no, food co-ops, some of the big food co-ops in the state are my clients, not Rainbow because it's a worker co-op, but Coopportunity, North Coast, some of the Davis, some of those others are my clients. And I had the privilege of working with Tim and Project Equity and CCCD to organize, from a legal side, Feed Cooperative. And when Tim started talking to me about having a multi-stakeholder worker and farmer co-op, I said, "You're insane. This is not going to work. You can't do this." And bless his heart, he convinced me. And so I just wanted to say a couple things about governance and co-ops. So we live in a country where we aspire to not have an autocrat or a king, and we aspire to have a democratically elected leadership in our government. So why do we take it for granted that we're going to have a top-down, autocratic type of business, and that we're going to accept being employed in a business that is run as an autocracy? It just doesn't make sense that on the one hand, we choose to live in a country that we want to have be run democratically, and yet in our work life, we're choosing to exist in structures that are not democratic. So to me, cooperatives really make a huge amount of sense, and they should be the norm instead of the exception. And so talking about, oh, co-ops fail and so on, it's human beings that fail, and it's the particular group of human beings that are not working. It's not because it's a co-op. So I would like to see a world where co-ops are the norm. It's been my life's work, and I'd like to just take a minute to talk about governance. So in a co-op, you can have what's called a collective board, and that's where every member is a member of the board. That can be very awkward, and Tim and I and the board spent a lot of time when we were designing Feed talking about how are we going to have a good representative type of structure, which is what we have in our quotes, democratic governance in the United States. How can we have that in our business as well? And so we spent a lot of time working on the bylaws to design a structure that we felt would be stable and would work. The other thing, just to talk about operating as a nonprofit, and in fact, the Food and Ag Code, which dates from way back, Aaron Sapiro, who was a wonderful co-op attorney at the turn of the century in San Francisco, who wrote the legislation that then became the Model Co-op Act, first adopted by Burley tobacco growers in Kentucky and then in many of the states. So we are now living with his vision of co-ops. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Talking about nonprofit, yeah. So it is called a nonprofit association because all profits at the co-op level need to be distributed out. To make a strong business that's going to last, one of the main things that makes co-ops not work and go bad is lack of funding, because there is an incentive to try and withdraw as much as possible for your personal benefit and not keep funding in the co-op. And so if you build your business with the bylaws having a requirement to put a certain amount as a reserve fund, which is what we built in to feed, it ensures longer term stability. And so that's but ultimately, all of the net, we don't say profit with a co-op, does get distributed out either to the members on the basis of use rather than investment. And likewise, voting is required to be one member, one vote. So that's all I have, and yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Therese. And we only met a couple of days ago, and when I told her that my vision for a future co-op is hybrid employees and cooks, did you quite tell me I was crazy too? You certainly gave me the cautionary tale in details, but I haven't given up on the idea either. So we're at 10 o'clock. So if you have any last things you want to do, this is the time to wrap us up. Oh.
I don't have anything wise to say to wrap it up, but I would encourage you all to research and try to participate in co-ops. It's also a way to have community involvement in a world where like that's decreasingly common. And if you're gonna do it, do the homework. Talk to Therese, talk to CCCD, and really build a foundation that can last, that's worthy of all the time you're gonna have to put in to build it.
Yeah, and Aldo is here from CCCD. Aldo, would you raise your hand? Another great person to talk to in the audience. You have anything else to say, or? Thank you all for joining us, and find us, find Therese, find Aldo.